Hello, Memorial friends. This is Jason Thornton and Tim Rush. And for those that don't know, we are the ministers at Memorial Drive Church of Christ, the speaking ministers, preaching ministers. And this is our post-sermon conversation. And this is a conversation that we would have normally because we actually share an office together. But because of the pandemic, we've transitioned to this way. And then we thought maybe you might be interested. And so what we're going to do is unpack Tim's sermon from Sunday and just kind of walk through implications, stuff that, didn't get time to talk about. To catch us up, Tim, hang on just a minute. To catch us up, let's talk about kind of your main points from the sermon on Sunday.
Yeah. So the main point was be aware. Stepping into lion versus lion, rules of engagement. And so the first step we're taking is being aware of what's going on. So I told the story about getting mugged on the metro in Lisbon, Portugal, which put up another great Lisbon photo. This is the Tower of Belém. Very beautiful place. So went from getting mugged on the metro and the idea of I wasn't aware of what I wasn't aware of until I was made aware of it. And then we talked about first being aware of yourself. And I may have said too much about this, about feeling like that's selfish, but making the point, if we are aware of ourselves, then we are prepared to be aware of others. And that being what we're going for here is to be aware of those around us. So I used the illustration of getting fired from my job for misspelling coach. The thought that struggling with that learning disability growing up, I did not want people to know that about me. So if somebody praised me for something, I wanted to lift that up. And even as I was delivering the sermon, I wanted to say like this. You may hear me say this, but I thought, am I doing that because I want people to know that about me, or am I doing it to set the illustration? Then I got in my own head there, and so then I feel like I'm missing really important things along the way, but concluded with whenever we realize something's going on and our awareness is peaked, then that's the invitation of God asking us to join him. Like it's in either of those pieces, awareness for myself, awareness for others, whatever it is, it's God saying, draw near to me, come into my presence, which will be what you share with us next week.
Absolutely. And there is almost a cause and effect between these different rules of engagement. And so just in case somebody's not caught up, and Tim, you taught to this really well, is that the devil, every human being plays by some rules of engagement. And many times that we take on the devil's rules of engagement, which amounts to you believe lies about yourself. And where we started with this the week before is that's what Goliath did to Saul. Goliath convinced Saul that the way to win the battle was for one man to fight Goliath, despite the fact that Saul never did warfare like that. Saul believed the lie that Goliath told, that that's the only way you could have a win. And then he suffered the consequences because now they're trying to figure out who can save us amongst themselves. When God's whole point is no one can save you amongst yourselves.
Right.
They should have taken time, prayed over it, and then probably God would have said, archers, just, kill this guy. He's not going to, you'll eventually hit him, with an arrow, or enough soldiers can just run over this guy. And I think, and that's a parallel for us, that we fight by rules of engagement, but oftentimes they're not productive. And you made this point, everything I do today is a result of what I did yesterday, and not just yesterday, but all of my yesterdays, way back to when I was a kid. And so when you learn something as a kid, we think about this in racism, where we say racism is learned. So if you're surrounded by people that are racist, you will think that's normal. That's the way you cope with life. That's the way you make your decisions in life. Eventually, Lord willing, you'll find somebody, ideally a person that stands with Christ, who will teach you gently that, but firmly, that's not right. I mean, it's unloving, it's not Christ-like, it's evil, and they will help you learn a new way to cope with something. So in our terminology, you're taking on a new way of the rule of engagement. You're not believing the lie that one race is superior to another. You're now interacting with it in a more truthful way. You have a more truthful rule of engagement. But in order to do that, you have to change. And everything I do today is either something I picked up in my childhood and adolescence, or it's something that's been corrected from my childhood or adolescence.
Yeah.
Because not everything we learned in our childhood and adolescence was wrong. A lot of it was right. But it's just those parts that are wrong. And what I mean by wrong is the parts that hurt us and therefore hurt other people. In other words, I don't lose my patience with you, Tim, or anybody. I don't lose my patience with you simply because you're too slow. I lose my patience with you because you're not moving the speed that I think I deserve. That's something going on inside of me that causes that anger. But this is why, and we'll get to this, but our battle isn't against flesh and blood applies so much here that first and foremost, my battle isn't against you, the person I'm struggling with being impatient with, but it's also not against me. It's against the lies that the devil has sown, the improper coping skills.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Man, it's so funny. And I referenced Proverbs 16 that talks about to myself, my motives are pure, or it uses the word innocent. We all think we are innocent, but God weighs the motives of the heart. And then 1 Corinthians 13, where it says, when I was a child, I talked like a child, I thought like a child. And when I became an adult, I put those things aside. And as you were talking, I flashed on when I came back from Portugal, and I'm 19, 20 years old. Maybe a year after I was back, I had still to complete my freshman year in college. I had almost enough hours to not be considered a freshman, but I was still a freshman. And I got together with some old friends that I graduated high school with. And they were all about to graduate. One of them had already graduated and was working on their master's. And they all had jobs that they were looking towards. And I felt this big. And I remember talking way too much about living in Portugal and traveling to Florence and the few days that I spent in Switzerland, and I'm about to go to South Africa. And I realized afterwards, it was interesting stuff, but I was kind of gross, and I felt gross. And I realized, oh man, I really felt insecure because they all were finishing what a 21-year-old ought to be finishing, and I wasn't close. And so I was changing the subject, and I was putting it on something that I had accomplished and how cool my passport looked. And again, when you're 18, 21, okay, you're growing up and you're learning. But now at 48, when I still fall into some of those patterns because I feel uncomfortable with the crowd I'm in, it's not as okay. That's thinking like a child. And it's best for me to realize, oh, you feel innocent when it's going on, but you need to step back and recognize what is it that you want for yourself.
Yeah.
And I didn't talk about this yesterday, but man, do you want value? Do you want acceptance? It's not bad to want those things. But once you realize what those are, you can turn to God and say, hey, God, I want to feel valued and accepted. You can even say to God, God, do you value and accept me? Or God, I don't think you value and accept me, and wait and watch how God responds. Watch what God does to show you value and acceptance. But it's realizing you need to ask the question. It's realizing you need to say it. That sparks the awareness and the awareness to listen to what he says.
Right. Well, that's, man, there's so many things you said that I want to dig into. Let's focus on that very last thing. Um, this, some people will say, well, self-awareness, what's the point? I'm just going to do what I'm going to do. The problem is that all of us are sinful beings, and the lack of self-awareness means you have a blind spot. Which that's not a bad, it's not evil to have a blind spot, because we all have blind spots.
Right.
You have a blind spot to your sin. Okay. And when you have a blind spot to your sin, then you have a choice, because God will give us all opportunities to notice our blind spots. He does it all the time, and we can look at the people of the Bible. We could do a whole series on blind spots in the Bible,
Yeah.
and talk about, a lot of different things. But the dynamic of God wanting to help us notice those blind spots and us being resistant. Let me give you an example from your example. Somebody later on says to you after that conversation with your high school peers, hey, you really dominated the conversation, we're bragging. If you are not self-aware, you'll say, I was just sharing my story.
Yeah.
I was just sharing my story. Yeah, that's all I was doing. They got to share their story. Why are you picking on me? You know what I mean? Instead of listening. Now, it doesn't mean when somebody brings a critique, they're right. But we have to listen. And the reason you felt it, in your words, is gross. And I want to dig into that word just a bit, or its ramifications. But the reason you felt it as gross is because your conscience was pricking you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You haven't seared your conscience like Peter or Paul talks about to Timothy in 1 Timothy 4. Your conscience said, something's not right. And so the word you chose was gross. Can you unpack gross? Like maybe even use Bible words to talk about what does gross mean?
Yeah. Is icky? Is icky a Bible word?
And Jesus said, verily, verily, I say unto you, this is icky.
Do the icky.
I remember now.
Yeah. So I was thinking of another time visiting with friends, and I was bad mouthing a group that I didn't want to associate with. And so then I felt equally gross and icky. It felt like I was wanting to set myself up on a pedestal. And so I'm trying to think, what did that feel like? Because it was in retrospect that I looked back on it and realized that's what I was trying to do. I was trying to look good and smart, clever and wise. And in the moment, like I can't think of a good Bible word. It felt kind of icky. Like there was something going on that was saying bad vibes. And I just didn't want to listen to it. I didn't want to acknowledge it in the moment because I felt I need to look smart. I need to look like I am wise and valuable. And so shut up, inner voice. Don't distract me from what's important work here.
Yeah. So, okay. So here, this is a little process, and for the viewers at home, we've not practiced this. So this is all, I'm just intrigued with this dynamic. So here's a telling that you be the judge of, Tim. You be the judge of. So I'll put me in the situation. I'm in this situation. I am making myself look better, putting myself higher than the other person. Well, clearly that's a direct disobedience to Philippians 2, where he says, consider the needs of others above your own. You know what I mean? And be like Jesus, right, and empty yourself. So basically, I am disobeying God. I am disobeying God in that moment. Now, I want to be clear to those that have this kind of chip on their shoulder. That doesn't mean I'm lost. It simply means in that moment, I'm disobeying God. I'm working against God. And I believe I'm quenching the Spirit in that moment. So I lose, we have this seal and we're connected to the Spirit. And that's how we have the fruit of the Spirit, because we're connected to the Spirit. If you are not connected with the Spirit, you can't have the fruit of the Spirit, you know?
Mhm.
And so what I think is in that moment when I'm doing that, I am intentionally, subconsciously, but still it's my choice. I am deciding to disconnect from trusting him to provide what I need, and I'm going to provide it for myself.
Yeah.
So I'm basically taking the place of God. And here's the problem with that. You only have the resources of the God you serve. So in that
True.
moment, I'm trading the resources of the fruit of the Spirit and the work of the Holy Spirit. I'm trading it for my own power. And guess what I have? Just those words.
Yeah.
And then afterwards, it feels like eating food that's not good for you. You just
Mhm.
feel gross later.
Yeah. Yeah. And I really believe that it goes back to Christ and his temptations, that he was being tempted in every way, uh, to him show up big and him to show up as, and then this is weird for Jesus to show up as it, and him saying that this isn't the time or place for that. Um, and I feel like in those moments, I want to be it. And man, I feel, oh, am I overstating it now to say I was putting myself on God's throne? But I wanted to be the one who was revered. And um, yeah. So it's a weird and subtle changing chairs with God, putting myself into that place where, look at me.
Yeah. And that's why it's so helpful to me. And it's terminology and it's semantics to a degree, but I think it does reflect the Spirit of God. Instead of saying to myself, Jason, you just quenched the Spirit. You've disconnected from God.
Yeah.
Instead of saying that, instead of saying, Jason, you're in the wrong chair.
Hmm.
Go back, and if you don't understand chair, one chair is trusting God completely, the other chair is anything else. It doesn't mean it's bad, it's just you're trusting something else. Then realizing God wants me back in the chair. God wants me back with Holy Spirit. Me saying I quenched the Spirit a second ago doesn't mean I have to quench the Spirit this second.
Yeah.
We're very used to this. I don't know if this is a word, but retributive. It's very retribution centric. If I did something wrong, yes, God forgives me, but he's got to punish me first. And I'm like, there is no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. Now, we wouldn't need to know that if we never sinned again.
Yeah.
For him to have to say that in Romans means you're going to sin again. And Paul just said in Romans 7, things I want to do, I don't do, the things you know how that goes. And he's like, a wretched man that I am, who would deliver. And he's like, but I'm reminded of this truth, that there's no condemnation in Christ.
Yeah.
So once you free yourself from, I wasn't good. So what does that mean? What it means is you need to repent. What it means is you need to move back to the seat. You need to move
Yeah.
back to trusting God with it instead of trying to provide on your own.
Man, this is going down a whole different road with this, but when you say no condemnation, what my mind triggered on was that doesn't mean there aren't consequences.
Right.
Um, and I feel like I feel like God is forever with us saying, let me help you avoid these consequences. Because yes, there is no condemnation. You are forgiven. There is grace. But when, like a piece of this, the second story where I didn't want to associate with some people and I wanted to look smart, and um, part of that uh, retrospective work was because 6 months later I was around one of the same people, and they were really rude and gross and icky towards me. And I really thought, man, where's that coming from? I've always gone out of my way to be really kind to this person. Why are they acting like this? And I remembered back to that night when I felt icky after having that conversation with them. And so this is me telling stories to myself. I was really offensive, and I came across as an egomaniac, and um, they lost respect for me that evening. And so and man, when I think about my early years, especially as an AIM assistant, and I think there are probably AIM students that just think, worst possible things about me because there were mistakes I was making, not just mistakes I was making, but some very consistent ones. And I think, man, they probably, oh, I hope that's not their image that they're carrying if they ever hear my name or think of me. But man, that would be a natural consequence of the actions that I took, mistakes that I was making. So there are consequences. But I feel like we can separate that from condemnation, just like we
Right.
can separate woundedness and saved. You
Yeah.
know, it's not the same thing when we talk about mistakes and hurts and you are, that's not equated with, and you are outside of God's grace or outside of his presence.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think, okay, so this is the challenge we have on this pendulum. The pendulum that's always swinging is like you can hear something. It's like Paul talking in Romans, specifically 4 and 5, about the grace of God and how Moses was saved, or not Moses, but Abraham was saved in this way. And so the pendulum is way over here on grace. And then in 6, he goes, so shall we sin that grace may abound, which would be the unhealthy extreme here. And he goes, by no means, you were baptized into his death. And the idea is to take it healthy, but then humanity would be like, oh, I am condemned. Like in the space of 2 chapters, we can lose so much perspective of it's not grace that doesn't have consequence, but simultaneously, it's not consequence that is so heavy you can't ever get beyond it. You know what I mean? And this is one of the challenges, because we tend to go to extremes when we hear a message. And I've experienced this, listen to teachers, where teachers or preachers will say something, and I'll take that one thing they say, and then I'll form a whole doctrine around it, which they didn't say, and then attribute the worst thing to them if they said it in a way that I didn't like. Now, I am freer not to do that now than I used to be, but that's still in me.
Yeah.
It is that idea of, we tend to swing like that. But yeah, so I would say, with that in mind, I can't remember where. Okay, so this, let's say this represents the idea that there is no condemnation. Now, truly, there's no condemnation is a healthy right in the middle. You know what I mean? But we can take it where there's no condemnation, so it doesn't matter what I do. You know what I mean? So then that switches to, well, because there's no consequences. Well, then we're like, no, that's not right. But then we tend to go to, oh, there are consequences. Well, now I forget there's no condemnation.
Right.
And the way this has to work is, and you're going to go back and forth, but not to stay at the extremes, is realizing, man, I feel low because, I'm over here more. I feel low because, I've lost respect for that person. Then I'm reminded there is no condemnation. And my tendency to think, well, then it's no big deal. And now, how dare that person, if God doesn't condemn me, but then realize, wait, there are consequences. And so you swing here, but then you're like, but God's going to help me work through those consequences.
Yeah.
And this is kind of the nature of those extremes. And I don't care if you recognize the pendulum, but it's happening in everybody sometimes.
Man, I tell you, this is where we need to bring in Shane to talk about pendulum swinging. In the class that he did on worship styles, he showed how the pendulum swings. It's not even century to century. It's more like, now I'm stuck in Spanish, siglo. It's
cycles.
Yeah.
Yeah,
but
cycles.
It could be greater than 100 years, or it could be a decade.
Right.
But he made the point that a pendulum on a clock helps keep time. It's not bad and bad. It's time of movement, and the idea of it's what keeps us moving. It's okay to be moving on this pendulum swing, and not that we want to be at either one of these places, but that is a way of keeping time. Total another sidetrack.
Yeah, no, it's really good. Yeah, and this is it, because we can get fixated with, I'm going to be the healthy center.
Mm-hmm.
And all you're doing there is creating blind spots for yourself.
Yeah.
Because it's not going to stop, because every day God teaches us something that's going to move us a little bit one way or the other. And I think that's a really important, aspect to put on this. That's really good. Hey, let's go back to the innocent dynamic. I that really resonated with me, that everybody thinks they're innocent, and then you framed it in an argument. And I always think, the closest to home is when Heather and I will argue or discuss, and how that is a hard habit to break, to think you're the innocent one,
Hmm.
and it doesn't mean, again, pendulum, it doesn't mean you go, well, then I'm the victimizer here. I'm either victim or the victimizer. No, it's the idea of realizing that's at play. And the answer here is really, this is what we're talking about right now, is an implication or an application of the temptation that the devil has for us to
Yeah.
stay over here or stay over there, or judge ourselves on either side, instead of simply accepting the grace of God, allowing him to teach us how to stay in a healthy space with him.
Yeah. Yeah. Man, this makes me think of marriage counseling that Kim and I have done with a couple of couples, where we've done this exercise that you're aware of, where you're able to look back on some of these messages and why are you carrying them. And it has nothing to do with the spouse or the boyfriend or girlfriend in the room. It's just what you have been carrying, and letting them watch you realize why you're carrying that message. That unpacks a great deal of, oh, this is why I always think I'm innocent, um, and what I'm actually doing, and how it's just not congruent to the grown-up relationship. But it
Right.
is so ingrained and so normal and so natural. Um, it like we would say, oh, it's just who I am. And if you will accept me as who I am, then we're going to be okay. And the truth is, that phrase of "it's just who I am," in the natural world, yes, and we are invited into a spiritual world, where that natural world, you can let go of that.
Yeah. That's a tremendous, tremendous observation. That is. Were you going to say something else?
Yeah, I don't know what it was.
Oh, fantastic. Fantastic. All right. So just trying to put this back in the bigger context. It's interesting. I want to point this out. When we were initially talking about be aware as a piece of this, I was much more thinking generally, just simply being aware there's a spiritual battle, you know,
Yeah,
and partially because that resonates so much with me, because when I was raised in an extremely argumentative dynamic. Everything was an argument, and everything had deep tension,
mm,
and there was a walking on eggshells. And I learned how to mitigate a lot of arguments through humor. So right now in my marriage, I will use humor at very inappropriate times. See, I want to use humor right now, talking about me inappropriately using humor. And I want to be clear, it's not that I'm using inappropriate humor. Like, I'm not telling dirty jokes. I'm just saying I will find funny things in very tense situations, because that was a coping mechanism from my childhood. It helped me get through. And so now I can't just say, if you would have asked me 10 years ago, I'd be, that's just who I am. You just don't like me, you know? And the truth is, no, that there was an unloving piece of that, because this is back to Philippians 2, I was only considering my point of view.
yeah,
I wasn't considering their point of view. So this awareness, there's almost like stages or layers of it. One awareness is a general awareness. There is a spiritual component to this, which is exactly what you just said, which I love that. When you're tempted to say, this is just how I am in the natural world, okay. But we're saying we're wanting to live in the spiritual world, in the supernatural world, and God says we can do better. Not shame on you, you're not doing
yeah,
better, but let's work together. Let's do better. And then that allows you to then become more aware of yourself, which you so honed in on well, and then more aware of the worlds of others. This is why I do like things like DISC or Enneagram or awareness of personality types. And anybody, and if you're turned off by Enneagram or personality types, can I just say, you've probably heard from somebody that's misusing it. That's almost always my experience. And I can misuse anything. If you love lasagna, I'll figure out a way to misuse it. if every time I see you, I hit you with a plate of lasagna, you might not like it for a while. And I think that's how people are sometimes with personality assessments is they use personality assessments as to pigeonhole others,
Mhm.
to be a scapegoat, to excuse themselves when they sin against you. That's not how these are simply saying, here's an invitation to being more aware of yourself. And as I learn how I am, I noticed, and I can specifically say this about you, Tim, I notice how you're different, and it helps me understand parts of you that might frustrate me, or parts of you that I may feel like are way beyond me. I'm like, wait a minute, like you have the ability in a heated conversation to step back, because you're a 9, to step back, see both sides of the story, and you ask good questions of both sides. I'm a 7. I love getting people excited about stuff. And I've learned conflict is necessary and can be beautiful. But I've got to really put my thinking cap on before I believe that.
Mm.
So when things get heated, I tend to want to either disengage and detach and leave, or I'm going to give you heat back, because that's how I was trained as a kid. So here's the interesting thing. When I notice your strength, Tim, if I don't realize, yeah, we're different, we are wired by God differently, then I will actually judge you as you think you're better than me,
Mm.
or me assess you are better than me. And then I feel like I've got to puff up
Yeah.
to be equal to you. And now all of a sudden we have an unloving relationship. So
And
that's the beauty of knowing these things about each other.
yeah, that I feel like uh, the piece I talked about yesterday, spelling out coach, and saying that I respond by either puffing up and showing I am smart, or self-deprecating and going, I feel like I'm crazy when I talk about that I have the same response that goes two different ways. And I feel like that's what you just said, was you have two responses that go exact opposite ways, either getting big or um, get it going small. And so that makes me feel better as a human. Like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, we
Yeah.
we all share that in common.
Yeah. Well, it's another example of pendulum. If you put it on the pendulum, if the center is resting in God,
Mhm.
and me taking control is me saying, um, Tim's a jerk because he thinks he's better than me, and or coming with a lot of energy, me doing the opposite and basically saying I have no responsibility here, is I don't need Tim. I'm not going to be around Tim. I'm just going to detach entirely. Everyone has a pendulum like this, and in truth, we have 1,000 of them,
Yeah. Yeah.
depending on the subject matter. And I think it's important because once I can conceptualize that, then I can catch it. Now we're not to the catch it part yet in the rules of engagement, but this is being aware is so important. And if you, as a listener, if you can only hang on to, it's enough for me to just start to practice thinking, I'm aware there's a spiritual battle. I'm
Mhm.
aware the devil is after me. I'm aware he's trying to manipulate me right now. Just take that. But the more you do it, the more you're going to start to notice, oh, here's something he's been doing in me for 20, 30, 40 years, you know, and I'm going to start. So my more I'm self-aware, the more I can deal with that. Then you have the privilege of starting to notice other people.
Yeah.
Oh, the devil's attacking them, and not say to them, the devil's attacking you as an assignment, but rather to have a spirit towards them, a tenderness towards them that wants to move alongside and help.
Yeah. Yeah. And my guess is that you need to go pretty quickly. But
Oh yeah, yeah.
I wanted to mention here, because we've talked about blind spots, and the nature of a blind spot is that we have set up our lives to not look at it. Like, it is there. And just because we aren't looking at it doesn't mean everybody else around us doesn't see it. Like, when I step into that zone of making myself look good, because I'm afraid of what you will really see, I'm usually not the first person in the room to realize I'm doing it. Others start, maybe they don't say, but they know, this isn't attractive. So if I've set up my life to not have to look at my blind spot, how do I become aware of them? And so I was reading in Romans this morning. Romans 1 is Paul's judgment of people. And I mean, it's harsh. And like I'm reading it going, man, if somebody only had the book of Romans, how would they view the world? And that's just from Romans 1. And then Romans 2 starts with, but everything you judge, you do. Like, Paul,
Like, I didn't need that.
yeah, and pick a lane,
Yeah.
judge, or you're judging me for judging. But when Jesus said, and we take this as hyperbole, the log and the speck, whenever we see a speck, there's a log in our own eye. And we take that as in circumstances or sometimes, but never with me. Every time I'm seeing your speck, I am innocent. And I feel like that is Jesus's huge gift to us, to say, when you are judging, recognize it and own it. Look in there and say, what is my judgment about this man? What is my judgment about this woman? Okay, how am I doing that? And I mean, that just sounds crazy because I never do that. That's why I'm so angry. And Jesus is saying, uh. And it can be the biggest gift to help us look and see blind spots and go, oh my goodness, I have set my life up to help me not look at that.
Yeah, that's so, man, that's gold. I wish you hadn't brought that up. I've got 50,000 things to say. I want to say this one thing and how I notice it, how I'm practicing noticing mine. 3 days ago, Heather was watching a TV show and it was just super interesting. And she would come and share bits and pieces because I didn't really watch a TV show, but I'd listen. And at one point, I'm like, "How many episodes are in this show?" And they're like, 5,000. Like, so ridiculous, I'm such a jerk. And so, and then I'm tempering. I'm like, wait, it's not that I don't like you talking to me about it. It's just, I don't know. I'm focusing. I was made something, and she was hurt, but moved on. It's fine. And then it's like the day after that, all of a sudden it hits me. I was irritated because of something totally different. There was some uncertainty in my life, and I can't honestly remember what it was, that created irritation, and she just happened to intersect with that time. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I went back to her and I said, yeah, I was really irritated. Hey, she won't watch this. I was awesome, Tim. I was amazing. You would not believe it. Anyway, but I went back to her and I said, I said, man, it wasn't even about you. It's not even about that. Because then she can get messages. I don't want to hear anything, that she has to say. And it's that idea but that's because of my practicing. That was part of my practice. And I say that not to pat myself on the back at all, but to say this is a process. And many times what you're trying to do is narrow the gap. Here's the event, and then here's your response. Okay. And you're wanting to narrow that. So instead of this being, hey, here's the event right here. And 6 years later, I realize it, I want to try to narrow that. I want to get closer and closer till eventually I won't even realize I'm using the rules of engagement. It's just David Buchanan used the terms resilient.
Mm-hmm.
I think the Bible uses the term perseverant, but it's that idea that we just more and more naturally do this. It becomes our muscle memory that this is how we look at life as we replace the coping skills that weren't helpful that we've received. And that's the whole point of doing. Now, let me go back. The whole point of doing this is the more you do this, the more you see Christ, and the more others see Christ in you.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that muscle memory. I feel like that's good because my dream is, it just becomes more and more natural. What my experience is, the obstacles become bigger and bigger. And so we don't grow out of needing it. But hopefully the muscle memory becomes more and more engaging. Like when, okay, this is, that my awareness is peaked. And so I know God is drawing me in, and it's muscle memory. It's not, and now I'm so mature I can skip over these steps because the obstacle becomes bigger.
Yeah, that's right. And your arrogance come as soon as I become good at something in God, I will almost immediately start to give myself a little credit,
Yeah.
just a little, and then a little more. And pretty soon I'm like, I got this, God.
Yep.
So
Yep.
there you go. Well, thank you, man. That was just a great job. You've put the proverbial pressure on me. So we'll be talking about what does it mean to draw near in the rules of engagement this next Sunday. So yeah,
Man,
I'm looking forward to it.
I'm looking forward to it. I love listening to you preach, so I'm excited about Sunday.
Thank you. Well, tremendous job this Sunday, and you have a great week.
All right, you too. Bye.
Bye.